He slapped a little girl outside the palace. The royal guard broke protocol and stepped in, emotional. The morning air was crisp and filled with a gentle warmth that hinted at the start of a perfect day. Sunlight glimmered off the palace gates, making the golden details shine like 1,000 tiny stars. Outside, the area was alive with people, yet there was a calm that made the place feel almost magical. Families had come to see the palace, tourists were taking photographs, and local vendors sold souvenirs and snacks. The soft murmur of voices, laughter, and the occasional shout of a street performer created a lively symphony that seemed to celebrate the beauty of life outside the royal grounds. Among the crowd stood a little girl, no older than 7, with bright eyes full of curiosity and a smile that could light up anyone's heart. She clutched her mother's hand tightly, her small fingers curling around the woman's with an almost desperate excitement. Her other hand held a little toy that she refused to put down, as if it were a treasure that made this day even more special. She had been dreaming about visiting the palace for weeks, talking about it every day, imagining the sparkling gates, the beautiful guards, and maybe, just maybe, catching a glimpse of the royal family. The girl's mother watched her with a mixture of amusement and gentle caution. She knew her daughter's energy was boundless, and that keeping her safe in such a crowded place would be a challenge. Still, she allowed her little one to lead the way, following her curious glances and imaginative chatter. As they walked closer to the gates, the girl's eyes widened even further. The intricate patterns carved into the palace walls, the way the sunlight danced on the golden gates, and the sight of the royal guards standing perfectly still like statues made her feel as though she had stepped into a storybook. The royal guards, tall and stern in their immaculate uniforms, were a sight to behold. They stood in formation, their expression serious, yet there was an undeniable aura of respect that seemed to radiate from them. Each movement was precise, calculated, and disciplined. They were trained to maintain decorum at all times, to act swiftly if anything threatened the safety of the palace, yet always with dignity and poise. Their presence alone commanded attention, and everyone in the crowd instinctively knew to keep a respectful distance. As the little girl approached, she tugged her mother slightly, pointing at a guard who was adjusting his stance with meticulous care. "Mommy, look! He looks like a knight," she exclaimed, her voice a mixture of awe and excitement. Her mother smiled, adjusting her daughter's hat to shield her from the sun. "Yes, darling, he does," she said softly, trying to keep her voice calm despite the little girl's bubbling enthusiasm. "But remember, we have to be polite and quiet near the guards." The girl nodded, though her eyes sparkled with barely contained excitement. She carefully stepped forward, her small feet padding softly on the stone pavement, as though even the way she walked needed to be respectful in the presence of such grandeur. Around her, the crowd moved with a sense of quiet admiration. Many adults tried to hide their own awe, pretending to be casual, yet stealing glances at the palace and its guards when they thought no one was looking. Children ran around more freely, their laughter ringing like delicate bells in the warm morning air. The smell of fresh flowers from nearby stalls mixed with the faint aroma of roasted nuts and baked goods. Vendors called out cheerfully, offering small trinkets and snacks, trying to catch the attention of visitors. The little girl's mother bought her a small bag of candied nuts, and the girl nibbled happily, barely taking her eyes off the palace. She felt as though she were part of something much larger than herself, a tiny character in a grand and beautiful world. Suddenly, a bird flew past, its wings brushing the warm air. The girl squealed in delight, pointing it out to her mother. "Look, Mommy." "The palace has its own little guards in the sky," she said, giggling. Her mother chuckled, ruffling her daughter's hair. "Yes, sweetheart, maybe they are helpers for the real guards." She felt a sense of peace in the moment, watching her daughter's imagination take flight. It reminded her of her own childhood dreams, the times she had wandered in wonder, wishing to see something magical. Nearby, a street performer was entertaining a small group of children, performing tricks with colorful scarves and juggling balls. The little girl watched, mesmerized, her eyes wide with fascination. She clapped along with the other children, completely immersed in the lively scene around her. Her mother stayed close, enjoying the innocence and joy that seemed to radiate from her daughter. Every laugh, every pointed finger, and every whispered, "Wow," made her heart swell with warmth. The crowd slowly began to inch closer to the palace gates. People wanted to see the guards more closely, to take pictures, and to experience the aura of royalty that seemed almost tangible. The little girl's excitement grew with every step. She leaned forward, trying to catch a better glimpse of the intricate details on the gates, of the golden symbols that shimmered in the sunlight. Her imagination was running wild, picturing princes, princesses, and grand ceremonies happening behind those gates. Her mother held her hand tightly, aware of the crowd pressing in from all sides. The little girl, however, seemed unaware of the bustling activity around her. She was completely absorbed in the beauty of the palace and the guards. Every tiny detail fascinated her, the way the guards' boots gleamed, how their uniforms fit perfectly, and the strict but graceful way they stood. She whispered to her mother, "Mommy, do you think they know magic?" Her mother smiled, not wanting to break the spell of wonder. "Maybe they do, darling," she said softly, encouraging her daughter's imagination. As they stood there, a gentle breeze rustled through the crowd, carrying with it the distant sound of a bell tower ringing. It was a sound that seemed to mark the beginning of something important, a subtle signal that this place was special, filled with stories and histories that stretched far beyond what anyone could see. The little girl tilted her head, listening carefully, as if the bells were speaking directly to her. Her mother smiled at the sight, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for this simple, yet profound moment of wonder and connection. The crowd continued to grow, yet there was an unspoken understanding among the people. Everyone knew that this was a place of respect, a place where rules mattered, and where the guards' presence was a reminder of order and dignity. The little girl, in her childlike innocence, seemed to sense this too. She stepped carefully, speaking softly, and observing the world with a mixture of curiosity and reverence. Every glance at the palace walls and every sound in the air seemed to hold a secret story waiting to be discovered. For the little girl, this was more than just a visit to the palace. It was an adventure, a moment that felt larger than life, where she could imagine herself as part of a magical world where good always triumphed and kindness mattered most. She did not yet know what challenges or surprises the day might hold, but she felt safe in the presence of her mother, and even in the stern, silent watch of the guards. There was a sense of harmony in the air, a balance between excitement and order, between imagination and reality. As the morning wore on, the palace gates loomed larger and larger before the little girl. She reached out to touch the cool metal, feeling the smooth surface beneath her fingers. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes, imagining what it would be like to walk through those gates, to see the halls where kings and queens had walked, to witness history in motion. Her mother gently reminded her to be careful, and the girl opened her eyes, her gaze filled with wonder and anticipation. The scene outside the palace was a mixture of ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary in the sense that people were gathered as they often did, chatting, laughing, and observing. Extraordinary because the palace represented a world beyond the ordinary, a place of grandeur, tradition, and history that captured the hearts of all who stood before it. The little girl's joy, innocence, and wide-eyed fascination reminded everyone present of the magic that could exist in even the simplest moments. And in that calm, golden morning, as sunlight kissed the palace walls and the guards stood silently, a story was beginning to unfold. It was a story that would soon challenge everyone's sense of right and wrong, courage and fear. But in this moment, all was still and beautiful. The little girl, oblivious to what lay ahead, continued to gaze in wonder, her imagination painting the palace in the most vivid and enchanting colors. The lively morning outside the palace gates continued with a sense of calm anticipation. Families moved slowly through the crowd, children tugging at their parents' hands, eager to see every detail. The little girl from before was still clutching her mother's hand, her small feet moving quickly but carefully on the stone pavement. Her eyes darted from the guards to the golden gates, to the performers and vendors around her, drinking in every new sight. The air smelled faintly of flowers and freshly baked bread, and a gentle breeze carried the laughter of children and the soft chatter of adults. Suddenly, the mood shifted without warning. From the far side of the crowd, a man emerged, pushing his way through the people with a sense of impatience that stood out sharply against the peaceful atmosphere. His face was tense, his movements abrupt, and there was a harshness in his tone that made people instinctively step aside. The crowd instinctively gave him space, unsure of what he might do. The little girl, still absorbed in the beauty of the palace, accidentally brushed against the man as she turned to point at a decorative fountain. It was a small, innocent movement, but it was enough to trigger a reaction that no one expected. The man's expression darkened immediately. He raised his hand and, before anyone could intervene, struck the little girl lightly across the cheek. Time seemed to slow for those who witnessed it. Gasps filled the air and the crowd froze, shocked at the sudden violence in such a peaceful setting. The girl stumbled back slightly, her hand instinctively going to her face. Tears welled up in her big, frightened eyes as she looked up at the man, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Her small body trembled with fear, and her mother's heart stopped for a moment as she rushed forward, wrapping her arms protectively around her daughter. "Why did you do that?" the mother shouted, her voice breaking with a mixture of fear and anger. Her eyes were wide with disbelief, scanning the man's face for any hint of remorse, but he only sneered, seeming to take pleasure in the fear he had caused. The crowd began to murmur nervously, unsure whether to step in or remain silent. Everyone was aware that the palace grounds were a place of strict rules, and the royal guards rarely acted unless absolutely necessary. Yet the man's behavior challenged the sense of safety everyone had felt just moments before. The little girl's tears began to flow freely now. She buried her face in her mother's shoulder, trying to hide from the man who had hurt her. Her mother held her tightly, whispering soothing words, hoping to calm both her daughter and herself. "It's okay, darling, it's okay," she murmured. "You're safe with me." Her voice was soft but trembling, filled with the weight of protective love. The mother's eyes scanned the surroundings, seeking help, any sign that someone would step in. Nearby, the royal guards stood silently, their faces carefully composed, their hands resting at their sides. They were trained to remain calm and composed, to act with precision and authority if needed, but not to escalate a situation unnecessarily. This was a delicate moment. Their eyes followed the man closely, noting his aggressive behavior, but they did not move immediately. The rules of protocol required them to observe first, to ensure that any action taken would not worsen the situation. The crowd began to shift uneasily. People whispered to one another, expressing their shock and concern. Some pulled their children closer, afraid that the man might turn his anger elsewhere. Others tried to quietly call for help, hoping that someone in authority would intervene. The tension in the air was almost palpable, as if the palace grounds themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The little girl, still crying, looked up at her mother with wide, confused eyes. She could not understand why someone would hurt her, why the beautiful morning had suddenly turned frightening. "Mommy, why did he do that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Her mother stroked her hair, struggling to find words that could make sense of the senseless. "Some people forget how to be kind, sweetheart," she said softly. "But don't worry, we're here and you're safe now." The man, seeing that the girl was crying and the mother was pleading, seemed to become more agitated. He pushed slightly against the crowd, his frustration growing. He was used to people moving out of his way, used to having his demands met, and he was not prepared for anyone to stand up to him. The crowd's murmurs and whispers seemed to irritate him even more, as if the very presence of onlookers was a challenge to his authority. Then, something remarkable happened. One of the royal guards, who had been observing from a short distance, stepped forward. His movements were slow but deliberate, exuding both calm and strength. The guard's eyes were fixed on the man, and there was a quiet intensity in his expression. He did not rush. He did not shout, but the moment he took a step forward, the atmosphere changed. People in the crowd instinctively gave him space, sensing that this was someone who could handle the situation without creating more chaos. The guard's voice was calm but firm. "Sir, you need to step back and leave this area immediately," he said. "That behavior is unacceptable." There was no anger in his tone, only a quiet authority that made people pay attention. The man, surprised by the direct confrontation, looked at the guard with a mix of irritation and disbelief. He had expected no one to stop him, especially not someone in uniform who was supposed to follow strict rules of conduct. The little girl, still holding her mother's hand, watched the guard with wide eyes. There was a sense of safety in his presence, a feeling that someone powerful and kind was now protecting her. Her tears began to slow, and she leaned slightly against her mother, seeking comfort from both the warmth of her mother's embrace and the reassurance of the guard standing before them. The crowd began to react more openly now. Some people whispered words of encouragement to the guard, while others silently hoped that the man would leave peacefully. It was a delicate balance. Any sudden move could escalate the situation, yet the guard remained calm and in control. He took another step forward, ensuring that the man could not advance further toward the child. "This is your final warning," the guard said, his voice steady. "Step away now, or security will take action." Faced with the unyielding authority of the guard, the man hesitated. For a moment, he seemed to weigh his options, considering whether to continue his aggression or retreat. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with anticipation. The little girl squeezed her mother's hand tightly, feeling the tension in the air, unsure of what would happen next. Finally, the man backed away, muttering under his breath, and moved toward the edge of the crowd. The guard did not relax his stance until the man was completely out of reach and could no longer pose a threat. Only then did he turn his attention to the little girl and her mother. He knelt slightly to meet their eyes, offering a reassuring smile. "Are you both okay?" he asked gently. "You're safe now." The mother, still holding her daughter, nodded vigorously. "Thank you so much," she said, her voice shaking. "Thank you for stepping in. I don't know what I would have done without you." The little girl peeked out from behind her mother, her eyes still glistening with tears but now mixed with relief. She looked at the guard and gave a small, tentative smile, feeling a sense of gratitude and trust toward the stranger who had protected her. People in the crowd began to murmur in admiration. The guard's courage had broken the tension and restored calm to a scene that could have turned dangerous. Witnesses later described feeling a deep sense of emotion, not just because of what had happened, but because of the way a single act of bravery and kindness could restore faith in humanity. The little girl's mother continued to thank the guard quietly, holding her child close, feeling the weight of gratitude in her heart. For the little girl, the morning had transformed into an experience that she would never forget. She had felt fear and confusion, but also relief and safety, all in the span of a few minutes. The guard had shown her, in a way words alone could not, that there are people in the world who will step up to protect the innocent, even when it is not required by rules or protocol. As the crowd slowly resumed its peaceful movement around the palace gates, the little girl's mother kept her daughter close, whispering comforting words. The sunlight continued to shine, the breeze continued to carry the sounds of life, and the palace gates gleamed in their quiet majesty. Yet, everyone who had witnessed the incident knew that the day had changed in subtle ways. There was a new awareness, a reminder of how quickly events can unfold, and how important courage and kindness are in moments of crisis. The little girl eventually wiped her tears and held her mother's hand again, feeling safer with each step. The guard returned to his position, standing silently but watchfully, a quiet protector in the background. The crowd slowly dispersed, with many people talking in hushed tones about what they had seen, the bravery of the guard, and the lesson that even in the most unexpected moments, compassion can make all the difference. And so the incident outside the palace, brief as it had been, left a lasting impression. It reminded everyone that courage is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet, measured, and full of heart. It showed that even in moments of fear, safety and kindness can prevail, restoring faith in the goodness of people. The crowd had barely begun to relax when whispers of astonishment and admiration rippled through those who had witnessed the incident. Everyone could feel the tension slowly ebbing, replaced with awe at what had just occurred. Yet, inside the palace grounds, things were far from ordinary. The royal guards were trained to follow strict rules. Their duty was to maintain order, to act decisively only when absolutely necessary, and to avoid unnecessary interaction with the public. They were instructed to keep their distance, observe quietly, and intervene only in extreme circumstances. Breaking protocol was never an easy decision. It could carry serious consequences. But in that moment, one guard knew instinctively that this was a situation that required more than routine observation. His eyes, sharp and focused, followed the man as he backed away toward the edge of the crowd, muttering under his breath. Despite the man moving away, the little girl's trembling frame and the fear still visible in her eyes told the guard one undeniable truth. Protocol was secondary to the immediate need to protect the child. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. Every step he had been trained to take, every rule he had memorized, seemed to clash with the moral clarity he now felt. Standing there, silently watching the girl and her mother, he realized that rules existed to protect people, but sometimes, true protection required courage beyond regulations. The guard moved forward, each step measured and deliberate, his posture commanding respect yet exuding calm. The crowd instinctively parted to make way for him, sensing that something important was unfolding. He did not rush. There was no unnecessary aggression in his movements, only a quiet determination that spoke louder than words ever could. The little girl, still clinging to her mother, glanced up at the guard. Something about him reassured her, though she did not fully understand why. She had seen guards before, but never one who seemed so aware of her fear, so committed to her safety in that singular moment. The mother, too, felt a sudden wave of relief, as if the weight of worry had lifted slightly with the guard's approach. She watched him carefully, noticing the precise way he positioned himself between them and the retreating man. The guard's voice, calm yet resolute, cut through the murmurs of the crowd. "Sir, you have caused distress to a child," he said, his words steady and firm. "That behavior is not acceptable anywhere, and it will not be tolerated here." There was no hint of anger, no shouting, only a clear statement of authority backed by presence and experience. The man stopped in his tracks, his face tightening with frustration and disbelief. He had expected no one to challenge him, and certainly not in such a composed, unwavering way. Every eye in the crowd followed the unfolding scene. People leaned slightly forward, captivated by the tension in the air. There was something deeply human about watching someone stand up for what was right, regardless of rules or expectations. The little girl's tears had begun to dry slightly, replaced with a cautious curiosity. She peeked out from behind her mother's shoulder, noticing the gentle yet commanding stance of the guard. Her small voice trembled, but she whispered, "Mommy, he looks like a hero." Her mother smiled, holding her daughter close, feeling a mixture of gratitude, pride, and relief. The guard maintained eye contact with the man, carefully assessing his next move. The man's hands fidgeted, and his body language suggested a conflict between his initial aggression and the sudden realization that he could no longer intimidate those around him. The guard's presence was a silent but undeniable message. Further misconduct would not be tolerated, and protection would not be compromised. Slowly, the guard took another step forward, closing the space between them just enough to make the man uncomfortable but not trapped. His hand rested lightly on the ceremonial hilt of his sword, more as a symbol of authority than a threat. The crowd sensed the tension peak. It was a delicate balance. The guard's every action was measured to prevent escalation, yet he was clearly ready to act decisively if the situation worsened. For a moment, time seemed suspended. The little girl's eyes widened as she realized that the guard was not just any soldier following orders. He was someone who had chosen to act, someone who had recognized the immediate need for courage and compassion. Her mother whispered softly, "See, darling. There are people who protect you, even when it's hard for them." The girl's small fingers tightened around her mother's hand, feeling a sense of security she had never known before. The man, finally confronted with unwavering authority, muttered something under his breath and took a hesitant step backward. The guard did not relax. His focus remained sharp, his presence unyielding. He ensured that the man could not approach the child again, while simultaneously signaling to the other guards to prepare if needed. There was no chaos, no shouting, only a controlled, tense atmosphere in which right had firmly opposed wrong. As the man eventually retreated to the far side of the crowd, the guard turned his attention fully to the little girl and her mother. He knelt slightly to be at eye level with the child, offering a warm, reassuring smile. "You are safe now," he said gently. "No one will harm you here." The words, simple yet powerful, carried a weight of reassurance that seemed to envelop the little girl like a protective blanket. Her mother exhaled deeply, relief flooding her senses. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice full of emotion. "Thank you for breaking protocol, for protecting my child." The guard nodded humbly. "It is my duty to protect everyone, especially children. Rules exist, yes, but sometimes compassion and immediate action must come first." His words were quiet but resonated deeply with those around him who had witnessed the event. The crowd slowly began to respond, the tension easing as murmurs of admiration filled the air. People whispered to each other about the courage of the guard, the quiet authority he had displayed, and the lesson that sometimes doing the right thing required stepping outside the lines of expectation. Witnesses later said that they had been moved not only by the guard's bravery, but by the gentle way he had reassured the little girl, restoring both her safety and her trust in the world. The little girl, though still slightly shaken, looked up at the guard with a tentative smile. She clutched her mother's hand but leaned slightly forward, as if to show gratitude. "Thank you, sir," she said softly, her voice filled with innocence and sincerity. The guard smiled warmly. "You're welcome, little one. Always remember that there are people who will stand up for you." For a few moments, all three stood there in quiet reflection. The palace gates glimmered behind them, sunlight catching on the intricate details and golden symbols, while the gentle hum of the crowd began to return. Vendors resumed their calls, children resumed their laughter, and the performers once again entertained small groups. Yet the incident had left an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed it. It was a moment of courage, a lesson in empathy, and a reminder that protection and kindness sometimes require difficult choices. Even the other royal guards, who had been observing closely, seemed moved by what had happened. They had trained for years to follow protocol, to maintain strict order. Yet here was a colleague who had made the brave decision to act immediately, balancing rules with human compassion. Their eyes followed him with a mixture of respect and admiration, recognizing that he had embodied the true spirit of their duty, protecting the innocent, no matter the challenge. As the little girl's mother helped her regain composure, she whispered, "You see, darling, that man could have hurt you more, but someone stepped in when it mattered most." The girl nodded slowly, her small face reflecting awe and understanding that was far beyond her years. She hugged her mother tightly, feeling safe once again, her imagination now filled with not only stories of palaces and guards, but also of courage and heroism in real life. The guard finally returned to his position, standing silently but watchfully. Though he had broken protocol, he did so with the utmost professionalism and compassion. His actions had restored calm to a situation that could have escalated, leaving a lasting impression on the crowd. Parents held their children a little closer, strangers exchanged looks of quiet admiration, and the little girl continued to glance at the guard, now seeing him as more than just a figure of authority. He was a protector, a human example of courage and kindness. And so, the morning outside the palace had transformed. What had begun as a routine day of sightseeing had become a moment of intense emotion, bravery, and humanity. Rules and protocol were important, but sometimes the true measure of honor lay in recognizing when courage and compassion must come first. The incident had ended safely, but its lessons lingered in the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. For the little girl, the guard's actions would remain a memory of courage that she might carry into her own life. For the mother, it was a reminder that hope and safety can exist even in unexpected places. And for the crowd, it was a silent but powerful lesson, that even in structured environments where rules dominate, the human heart and moral courage can never be replaced. The moment the man finally retreated and the tension outside the palace began to ease, a collective sense of relief spread through the crowd. People who had been frozen with shock slowly exhaled, their bodies relaxing as though a weight had been lifted. Some parents held their children a little tighter, while others whispered words of reassurance, trying to help everyone, including themselves, process what had just happened. The little girl, still clinging to her mother, blinked through her tears and tried to understand the sudden whirlwind of fear and relief. Her small hand squeezed her mother's even tighter, and she let out a soft, shaky sigh, feeling the lingering echo of fear begin to fade. The mother continued to comfort her daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her face and speaking gently. "It's over now, darling. You're safe. Everything is going to be okay." Her voice was calm but carried the tremor of emotion that comes from protecting a child from harm. She bent slightly, wrapping both arms around the girl and holding her close. The little girl's eyes, still wide, searched the crowd, trying to understand how quickly the morning had turned frightening. Slowly, she realized that not all strangers were dangerous, that there were people who would step in to protect her when she couldn't protect herself. People around them began murmuring quietly, sharing their astonishment. "Did you see that?" The guard stepped in all by himself. One man whispered to his companion, his voice low with admiration. "I thought he would just watch like the rest, but he didn't hesitate. He did the right thing." A mother nearby nodded, holding her own child a little closer. "It's amazing," she said softly. "That guard was brave but gentle too. He didn't yell, didn't scare anyone, and he made sure the child was safe first." The crowd's mood shifted from tension to quiet awe. Many people instinctively began to recount the story to those standing nearby, reliving the moment as if telling a tale of heroism. Some of them took out their phones to quietly capture photos of the palace and the guards, though not of the little girl, respecting her privacy and the delicate nature of the incident. Others simply stood silently, reflecting on the courage they had witnessed. The incident, brief as it was, had left a lasting impression, and the story was already spreading among those who had been present. The little girl's mother, still holding her daughter, approached the guard who had intervened. "I can't thank you enough," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. "You didn't have to step in, and yet you did. You saved my child, and I don't know how to explain what that means to me." The guard shook his head slightly, his expression modest. "It's my duty to protect everyone," he said softly. "Sometimes that means making a decision that goes beyond rules. The important thing is that she's safe." His words were simple, but they carried a depth of professionalism and humanity that touched everyone nearby. The little girl, still feeling a mix of fear and relief, peeked out from behind her mother. She looked at the guard, curiosity and awe shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered softly, her voice tiny but sincere. The guard smiled gently, kneeling slightly to meet her gaze. "You're welcome, little one. Always remember that there are people who will look out for you when you need it most." That small exchange, brief as it was, seemed to solidify a sense of trust and safety for the child, replacing her fear with a quiet admiration for the courage she had witnessed. As the crowd slowly began to return to the lighter, everyday rhythm of the morning, many could not help but discuss the implications of what had just occurred. Parents talked to their children about courage and kindness. "See how he helped that little girl?" one father asked his son. "Even though the rules said to wait, he did what was right. That's the kind of bravery that matters." Children listened, wide-eyed, absorbing the story as if it were a real-life fairy tale. The incident had become more than just a brief moment. It had become a lesson in human decency, in moral courage, and in empathy. Even the other royal guards, standing at their posts, seemed to feel the ripple effect of what had happened. They had been trained to follow strict protocol, to maintain order and avoid unnecessary action. Yet the courage of their colleague had reminded them of the deeper purpose of their duty. It was not just about rules, uniforms, or appearances. It was about protecting the vulnerable, maintaining peace, and showing humanity in every decision. They exchanged quiet glances with one another, silently acknowledging the bravery that had restored safety and calm in a tense moment. Nearby, vendors and street performers returned to their activities, though their voices carried a softer, more reflective tone. "Did you see that guard?" one vendor asked another, arranging small trinkets on a display. "He didn't just stop the man, he made sure the child felt safe." "That takes courage." Others nodded in agreement, realizing that they had witnessed something extraordinary, even in a seemingly ordinary morning at the palace gates. The incident had transformed the environment, leaving a subtle but profound sense of respect for the bravery they had observed. The little girl's mother held her daughter close as they slowly walked toward the exit of the palace grounds. "I hope you remember this, sweetheart," she whispered softly. "This is a lesson in courage, in kindness, and in standing up for what's right." The girl nodded slowly, her small face thoughtful. Though she had been frightened, she had also seen the power of compassion in action. It was a memory that would likely stay with her for a lifetime, a moment when someone stepped in to protect her, even at the risk of breaking rules, and showed her that goodness could triumph over fear. Some members of the crowd began to quietly applaud, not in a loud celebration, but as a gesture of respect for the guard who had intervened. Others simply smiled and whispered their admiration to those around them. The palace gates, still gleaming in the sunlight, now seemed to symbolize more than just history and grandeur. They represented a place where courage and humanity could shine, even in moments of tension and uncertainty. The little girl, now feeling more at ease, looked around at the people she had shared the experience with. The morning had begun with excitement and wonder, shifted suddenly to fear, and had finally settled into relief and admiration. She realized that the world could be both frightening and beautiful at the same time, but that kindness and bravery could make all the difference. Her small hand tightened around her mother's and she whispered softly, "I want to be brave like him someday." Her mother smiled, tears in her eyes. "You will be, darling. You already have the heart for it." The guard, having ensured that the situation was fully under control, returned to his position, standing silently but watchfully. He did not seek attention or praise, yet the people around him could not help but notice the quiet dignity he exuded. His actions had not only resolved the immediate danger, but had also left a profound emotional impact on the witnesses. People walked away carrying with them a story of courage, empathy, and the reminder that sometimes real heroism is quiet, deliberate, and deeply human. Even after the crowd had dispersed, the story began to spread quietly. Visitors told friends and family about what they had seen. Social media posts started to circulate, praising the guard for his bravery and moral clarity. News outlets, always attentive to stories of human interest, began to cover the incident, highlighting the importance of empathy and courage in everyday life. The little girl's experience became a symbol of the human capacity to protect and care for others, a reminder that even small acts of bravery could leave a lasting mark. The mourning continued, but the atmosphere had changed subtly. People moved with a renewed awareness, observing one another with more kindness and consideration. Parents hugged their children a little tighter, strangers offered small smiles to each other, and a sense of shared humanity lingered in the air. The incident, brief as it had been, reminded everyone that courage was not always loud or dramatic. It could be gentle, precise, and profoundly impactful. For the little girl, the experience left an indelible impression. She had learned, in a very real and emotional way, that there were people who would act to protect her, who would prioritize kindness and courage over strict adherence to rules. The memory of the guard's calm authority and compassionate intervention would likely remain with her for years to come, a touchstone for how she might respond to fear, danger, or injustice in her own life. And so, the aftermath of the incident became more than a reflection on one act of bravery. It was a lesson for everyone present, parents, children, tourists, and locals alike. Courage, empathy, and action in the face of uncertainty had the power to transform a frightening moment into a story of hope, trust, and humanity. The little girl held her mother's hand as they walked away from the palace gates, carrying with them a sense of safety, admiration, and inspiration that would last far beyond the morning. As the day wore on, the palace grounds gradually returned to their usual rhythm. The hustle and bustle of tourists, families, and vendors resumed, but there was a subtle change in the air. People who had witnessed the morning's incident carried with them a new sense of reflection. The story of the little girl, the angry man, and the courageous royal guard had already begun to take root in the hearts of all who had been present. It was more than a simple tale of a confrontation. It was a lesson in human values, courage, and kindness that lingered quietly in the mind. The little girl, walking hand in hand with her mother, looked around at the palace gates with a mixture of awe and thoughtfulness. The morning, which had begun with wide-eyed excitement and wonder, had carried her through fear, relief, and finally inspiration. She could not stop thinking about the guard who had stepped forward, breaking protocol to protect her. In her young mind, he was not just a guard in uniform. He was a real-life hero, someone who showed that doing what is right can sometimes mean standing alone, even when it is difficult. Her mother noticed the thoughtful expression on her daughter's face. "You've been very brave today," she said softly, squeezing the girl's hand. "Not just because you stayed calm, but because you trusted that someone would protect you. That takes courage too." The girl nodded slowly, thinking about the morning's events and trying to make sense of what she had experienced. It was a lot for a small child to process, but even at her young age, she had learned an important truth, that in the face of fear, compassion and courage could make all the difference. The crowd, too, had dispersed slowly, But the story did not end with them leaving. People spoke in hushed tones to one another, retelling the incident, emphasizing the courage of the guard and the relief that came with the resolution. "It was remarkable," one visitor said to another. "He didn't just follow orders. He saw a child in need and acted immediately." That is bravery and humanity combined. Others nodded in agreement, recognizing the quiet power of such moral courage. Even those who had arrived later at the palace found themselves drawn into the story, hearing about the little girl, the man, and the guard from those who had witnessed it firsthand. The guard, meanwhile, had returned to his post, standing silently with his fellow officers. Yet, unlike before, there was a subtle difference in the way he carried himself. He had performed his duty according to the highest standards of morality, and though he had momentarily broken protocol, he had acted with professionalism, compassion, and courage. He did not seek recognition, and he did not boast of what he had done. To him, it was simply the right thing to do, the natural response when a child's safety was at risk. Still, the whispers and admiring glances of the crowd spoke louder than any formal commendation could, spreading a quiet respect for his actions throughout the palace grounds. As the little girl and her mother moved away from the gates, they passed families, tourists, and staff who had witnessed the morning's events. Each encounter was marked by smiles, nods, and quiet acknowledgement. People who had initially come to the palace to see history and grandeur now found themselves reflecting on something even more profound: the power of courage, empathy, and moral clarity. The incident had become a real-life story of inspiration, demonstrating that rules and protocol are important, but the heart and conscience of an individual can transcend them when necessary. The mother looked down at her daughter and saw that she was still processing the experience. "Do you understand why what he did was so important?" she asked gently. The girl nodded, thinking carefully. "Because he helped me when no one else could," she said softly. Even though he could have just stayed there, he chose to do the right thing. Her mother smiled, proud of her insight and maturity. "Yes, darling, that is exactly right. Sometimes we need courage to do what is right, even when it is not easy. And sometimes, kindness and empathy are the most powerful tools we have." The incident also sparked reflection among other visitors. Many had never thought about the human element behind rules and regulations before. They had seen authority figures as distant or untouchable, as people who followed instructions without emotion or personal judgment. But witnessing the guard's actions changed that perception. It was a reminder that true authority is not just about power. It is about responsibility, empathy, and the willingness to act for the well-being of others, even when it requires courage or risk. Street vendors who had paused during the commotion returned to their stalls with new conversations in mind. They discussed what they had seen and how it had affected them. "It's amazing," one vendor said to another, arranging his goods carefully. "He didn't just stop the man. He made sure the child felt safe too. That takes a lot of heart." The other vendor nodded thoughtfully, realizing that the morning's events had taught everyone present a subtle but meaningful lesson about human values. The little girl's experience was also shaping her understanding of courage and trust. Earlier that morning, she had seen the world as a place full of wonder and beauty, but also potential danger. By experiencing fear and then witnessing someone step forward to protect her, she learned a powerful lesson. That fear can be met with compassion, that danger can be met with courage, and that there are people who will choose to do good even when it is not convenient. These lessons, small but deeply felt, would likely stay with her for a lifetime. Meanwhile, news of the incident began to spread beyond the palace grounds. Tourists and locals shared their experiences with friends and family, emphasizing the courage of the guard and the relief felt by the little girl and her mother. Conversations in cafes, buses, and homes echoed the same themes: bravery, kindness, and the importance of standing up for what is right. Social media posts began to circulate, praising the guard and highlighting the importance of moral courage in everyday life. The story became more than just a palace incident. It became an example of humanity in action, a reminder that even small acts of courage can have far-reaching impacts. Back at the palace, the guards continued their duties, but the mood was subtly changed. They had seen firsthand that protocol alone is not enough. Sometimes, courage and judgment must guide action. The guard who had intervened remained at his post, quiet and composed, aware that he had done something important, though he did not seek accolades. He simply focused on his duty, now carrying with him the knowledge that his actions had provided safety, reassurance, and inspiration to many. The mother walked with her daughter, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and reflection. "You saw something today that not everyone gets to see," she said softly. "You saw bravery, empathy, and someone choosing to do the right thing when it mattered most." The little girl nodded, her mind replaying the morning's events in vivid detail. She thought about the fear, the tears, the relief, and finally, the kindness and courage that had restored safety. It was a lesson that transcended rules, instructions, or authority. It was a lesson of the heart. As they reached the edge of the palace grounds, the little girl paused and looked back at the guards standing at their posts. She smiled faintly, a smile filled with respect and admiration. "I want to help people too, Mommy," she said quietly. "I want to be brave and kind like him." Her mother smiled, tears welling in her eyes. "You will be, darling. You already have the heart for it." In that moment, the mother realized that courage and empathy are lessons that can begin in childhood, inspired by the actions of those who lead by example. Throughout the day, the palace staff and visitors continued to reflect on the incident. Even those who had not directly witnessed it heard accounts from friends and family, spreading a ripple of admiration and thoughtfulness. The story became more than a news item. It became a shared human experience, one that highlighted the importance of compassion, courage, and moral clarity. The morning had begun like any other, but it had ended with a quiet, profound lesson for all who were present. In the evening, as the sun cast long shadows across the palace grounds, the little girl's mother reflected on the day. She thought about how quickly fear had arrived and how quickly it had been replaced by reassurance, all because one person chose to do the right thing. She realized that while rules and protocol are necessary, human judgment guided by empathy and courage can transform moments of fear into moments of hope. It was a lesson she knew she would pass on to her daughter, a principle that could guide her throughout life. The little girl, now calm and thoughtful, held her mother's hand as they walked toward home. She had seen bravery firsthand, experienced protection, and understood, even in her small way, the power of kindness in action. Her imagination, once filled solely with stories of palaces and grandeur, now included real-life heroes, people who acted with courage, compassion, and humanity in the face of fear. The memory of the guard's actions would remain with her, shaping her understanding of what it meant to be brave and kind in the world. By nightfall, the palace grounds were quiet once again. The golden gates reflected the soft glow of the setting sun, and the guards resumed their silent watch, vigilant but calm. The story of the morning incident lingered, not as a tale of fear or conflict, but as a story of hope, courage, and the enduring power of empathy. Those who had witnessed it would carry the lessons forward, sharing them with friends, family, and strangers alike, ensuring that the impact of one courageous act would ripple far beyond the walls of the palace. In the end, the incident outside the palace gates became more than a story of conflict. It became a story of humanity. It was a reminder that even in structured, rule-bound environments, true courage is measured by the willingness to act for the good of others. It was a lesson in empathy, in moral responsibility, and in the quiet heroism that exists in everyday life. And for the little girl, her mother, and the crowd that morning, It was a memory that would inspire hope, admiration, and a deeper understanding of what it means to be human.